We are now on page 16 and going to start working on the border that goes around our tree block. So here's the pieces we're going to need. We need 16 of the M cream snowflakes and 16 of the M cream tiles, and then an assortment of the L red triangles. Now we have 16 of each color, and we only need a total of 32. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 8 of each of these to match with these two packages of 16, and then the others will be used on another section. So here is one of my L and M half square triangles, and I prefer to sew without those little dog ears on there. And I also like to square up my half square triangles with a block lock ruler. Now with this pattern, they have you cut the squares in half and they're supposed to come out exactly right. Well, that doesn't ever happen to me. So I took just a little bit extra scant of a 1/4 inch seam. I mean, it still looks, there's my seam line right there. It's still pretty close to my normal scant 1/4 inch, but just a tiny bit less, so that I can increase my chances of having a more accurate half square triangle. So these are going to square to 2 3/4. If you've not used a block lock ruler before, they have this little groove on the back side, and the seam here fits in that groove. So I'm going to put my seam in that groove and then slide it up and down the seam, the ruler up and down the seam, until I have, at least, in a perfect world, I would have a little bit to cut off on all sides. Because these were cut on the diagonal before they were sewn, I probably won't have any extra. So what I'm going to do is get as close as I can on these two sides, which it looks like there's just a little bit here I can cut off, and might go back just a tiny bit to make sure I'm okay there. Okay, I'm going to trim this off on two sides. And there's just a little sliver on that top to cut off. Now, to get to the other two sides, I'm going to spin this around, slide my ruler down, which doesn't slide very well because I did put some sandpaper dots on there to keep it from sliding. Now, I'm going to line this up, my freshly cut edges here, with my 2 3/4 lines. And as you can see, it is a little bit short there, but I'm going to cut off just this little sliver I have right here, and my dog ear on the other side. So you can see that even though I took more than a usual scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, I still ended up a little bit short, but it's just a couple threads. I'm going to roll with it. So the one thing I do want to show you, though, when you're using the block lock ruler, when you have your seam in that little groove, the point of the ruler, this corner, should be right on your seam allowance. If you put your seam in the groove and the point of your ruler is off, turn your ruler upside down. So rotate it 180 degrees. That's the symptom and the fix. Okay, we are on page 16, step 10, and we are ready to join our N triangles to our K squares. And there are 3 different reds we're using. You're just going to flip this over, sew it on here. I do, when I'm doing this kind of piecing, I prefer to start at the straight end, so I'm going to flip it over and sew here. When you get to this point, I want to point out, this one I've pieced already, that right here, you won't end up at this intersection like we have in other blocks. You're going to end up a little over here. That is correct. So you're just going to sew those triangles on there and then press them towards the white. Here is our next step. We're going to add this next triangle onto our little unit here. Now you have to be careful how you orient it. You want these white triangles to make a straight line across. It's really easy to get it turned around and sew it on the wrong way. So you want to double check and make sure you're making a straight line across. Line up your raw edges here, and like with some of our previous blocks, this time your 1/4 inch should start or stop right there at that intersection when you sew that seam right there. So here's one I have sewn, and you can see it goes right there, and when that happens, when you fold this back, you have a nice straight line here. So that's what we're making next. All right, we are on to our next step. We are now ready to add some of our L squares, although it's not a square, L triangles to this triangle unit. So they're going to go like that, just like that. I did go through and I sorted my pieces, and I made sure that this red did not match this red, did not match this red, so that I had 3 different reds in each unit. So when we join this red triangle onto this unit, we are going to line it up just like so, so that these raw edges at this point meet, and then this corner will hang off, and we'll sew our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, just like before, when we get to this point, this top triangle is going to be off the edge where our seam is. Our seam is not going to line up with that point, just like before where it's off a little bit. And then when we add this triangle on here, again, we're going to line up our raw edges here. This should, by the way, in a perfect world, will make a straight line here, and this will make a nice even straight line here with our raw edges. And then when we sew this 1/4 inch seam allowance, right here will be our 1/4 inch seam. Once you get that triangle sewn on, it will look something like that. And having that lined up will give you a nice straight edge here. If you can notice, mine was off just a tiny little bit right here, like 2 threads worth. But I think it'll be okay. And then I'm going to experiment. I think I can square this up using one of my Flying Geese block lock rulers. So here we are with our finished little unit with our N, K, and L pieces. And I found my Flying Geese ruler that is 2 1/4 by 4 1/2 finished. And that does fit right there perfectly. So the reason I knew to use this size is because the cream squares that go on the ends of this unit are cut at 2 3/4. So subtract your 1/2 inch seam allowance and you get 2 1/4. So I was able to find one that worked. So what I want to point out here is that the Flying Geese ruler, the block, has the little groove in here that fits right in that seam allowance, kind of like our 1/2 square triangle did. Now, when I put this in here, what I want you to notice is it rocks a little bit. It's because I'm not perfect. So I'm just going to line it up as best I can. And you can see here, right here where it's a little bit short also. I'm just going to kind of ignore where they're short. I'm going to trim my dog ears off and get it as square as I can. And when it's all trimmed up, it looks like that. It may be a little bit short here and there, but it's pretty close.